our mission is to inspire lifelong love of science in everyone. And we say that we want a world where science belongs to each of us for the good of all of us. Each of us, all of us, everyone. There are no exceptions.
Good evening, everyone. 3 words: science across borders. Looking around, you can see that science pretty much built this lovely city. And how could science exist in any way except across borders? We know this here, around here. About 28% of our people here in Boston are foreign-born. And every year, more than 300,000 students come from all around the world to study here. Our friends at the Museum of Science certainly seem to see it that way. They have a wonderful vision, which is a world where science belongs to each of us for the good of all of us. A world, not a community or a country, but a whole world. So it's in the nature of knowledge to move, we know that, but science also belongs legitimately to commercial entities and to national security interests. And so as the world of science accelerates and converges, what does the future of science beyond borders look like for us and the world? The Museum of Science down there is a great vantage point from which to consider this question, as it hosts 5 million visitors a year, which is a jaw-dropping number from all over the world. And you may not know it yet, but you will. It is surging ahead with the construction of its amazing new public science commons. So how fortunate the museum president, Tim Ritchie, is here tonight to help us consider that future we've just been mentioning. So Tim Ritchie is the president of the Museum of Science, and since 2004, he has served as president of science centers across the country, including McWane Science Center and Tech Interactive. A lawyer by training, Tim has spent his career creating opportunities for people to maximize their potential through learning. He has helped defend people on death row and has served in a poverty law clinic. He left his law practice to create education programs in Birmingham, Alabama, and later led a nonprofit in Louisville, Kentucky that serves adults with disabilities. Tim Ritchie received his BA from Davidson, his JD from Duke Law School, and his MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School. Please join me in welcoming Tim Ritchie.
Thank you, Mary, and it's a real pleasure to be at WorldBoston. I have an extremely high view of this organization. I got introduced to it when the Fulbright Scholar Program came to the Museum of Science, and I got a chance to introduce myself to them and welcome them to the museum. And I was so impressed to have the whole world gather in our museum. And it is a part of our mission and our vision. We say that our mission is to inspire lifelong love of science in everyone. And we say that we want a world where science belongs to each of us for the good of all of us. Each of us, all of us, everyone. There are no exceptions. And that's a big part of what I think energizes WorldBoston. I do want to say one little thing to correct on our attendance. So here's the deal. We'll serve about 1.4 million people on site. That is the largest attendance of any cultural institution in Boston. We'll serve about 4 million people in schools. And this year, we will reach almost 400 million people online. 400 million people online. Science really is global as a common language, and it's something that we all share and humanity uses to solve the problems before it. I was pleased to be asked to do this because my affection for diplomacy is not just because it helps build a great world, but because one of the influences on my life was the second Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld. If you know this is his book, Markings, and you can see how beat up it is. This has almost nothing. In fact, it actually has nothing in it about his time as the Secretary General or anything about diplomacy at all. It is entirely his interior life. It's his reflections on his weaknesses, his strengths, his opportunities, and on humanity. And what Dag Hammarskjöld certainly believed, and which I believe as well, is that being precedes doing. Who we are defines what we do. That's certainly true in science and in diplomacy. Just if you don't know about Dag Hammarskjöld, he was one of 2 people to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize posthumously after his death. And he was well loved for his work in trying to bring about peace in the Middle East, in the Congo, and during the Cold War. So anyways, he had a big influence on me, and that's what I know about diplomacy. I would like to reflect a little bit tonight on how science and diplomacy are actually a lot alike. I'm going to explore a little bit about how science and diplomacy are alike, and then I'm going to talk about some obvious examples where science and diplomacy have worked together to solve problems, and then also focus on what I consider to be the top 10 global problems that we face right now that will require science and diplomacy to work together. It seems to me that science and diplomacy, among many reasons, are alike in 3 big ways. 1, they're limited. 2, they are both optimistic. And 3, they both require the weaving together of what is possible to overcome what is challenging. So, limited. Science is awesome. It helps us understand the world around us so that we can solve the problems before us. We see it, we're here. Science can do many great things, but it is limited. It has limited power to help us become wise or brave or kind or good. In fact, science in the wrong hands can create this world as a vast, chaotic horror chamber. We've seen it. It's happened before. It's happened in the not too recent past. It's happening now. Science can be used in terrible ways. In fact, it is only used for good if the people behind it make it count for goodness. Being precedes doing. And so science is limited. It's also limited because the tools we have to solve problems, as good as they are still not as good as they need to be. So science is limited by its tools. It's always trying to overcome some limitation in order to solve a really, really, really big problem. So it's limited in a lot of different ways. It needs good people, good institutions, good communities to come around it and bend it toward what is good, or else it will just be bent in whatever way people want to use it. And it's limited because, frankly, the world is full of problems that we're just beginning to try to be able to solve. Sure, we know a lot, but we don't know nearly all there is to know out there. And what about diplomats? Well, diplomacy is limited too. It's limited for the same reason, because people are limited and nations are limited. We are frail, we are fearful. That's what it means to be a human. We're paranoid, we're selfish. This is a very difficult thing to do. So into all that midst of individuals and nations with all our frailty come diplomats, and they have to work within the limitations that they have. And they have to work not only as across the aisle with the people they might be opposing or trying to work with, they also sometimes have to work with and sometimes even oppose their own nations, their own challenges. And so diplomats also have to work with the facts of human nature. It's also limited in terms of what the options they are, like science has, with limited options in terms of its tools. So together, it leads to the third point, which is great scientists and great diplomats are weavers of what's possible. We're weavers of what's possible as we overcome what's challenging. That's just the way it is. And that takes us once again back to Dag Hammarskjöld. And you think about being preceding doing, you'd be interested, if you haven't read Markings before, just how disciplined he was, how committed he was to make the world a better place. And you can see that with scientists. You can see that especially with young scientists. They are citizens first. They went into science because they wanted to make the world a better place. And they are scientists second. They want to use their science to an end, not an end in itself. And I'm sure that's true with respect to diplomacy as well. So I want to highlight some successes where science has worked together with diplomacy to make something extraordinary happen. One was the Montreal Protocol in 1987, which is the protocol that helped to attack the problem we were having, which is the destruction of the ozone layer. And in fact, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, were eliminated gradually because nations came together and the ozone layer was healed. That was science and democracy, science and diplomacy coming together to say, let's look beyond our short-term pain to a longer gain. And it was a great triumph. Another, which is still under great litigation right now, is the Paris Climate Accord Agreements of 2015. Nations united to have climate action. Now, have we succeeded? Actually, no. But it would have been a lot worse if we hadn't come together at that time. And clearly, the United States' actions recently have been terrible in terms of the Paris Agreement, and grateful to the Bloomberg Foundation, actually, for paying our dues on that. The eradication of smallpox, World Health Organization, 1980. Unbelievable triumph for something that had been plaguing humanity for a long, long, long time. Science, diplomacy came together. And I'm going to go on and not talk about too awfully many more. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1996. Science, diplomacy coming together to bring about something extraordinary there. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959, which preserved a continent for peace and science. The International Cooperation on the Human Genome Project, which was in about 2003 and for a little bit longer. I think the world coming together on the COVID vaccines during COVID-19. And then one that seems more like politics and diplomacy, but still a lot of science to it, which was the Ottawa Treaty of 1997, banning landmines. These were diplomacy and science at its best. Lessons to take away, diplomacy does have a way to overcome political and cultural differences, and that's right. But without the science, it wasn't going to get there. Of course, without diplomacy, science couldn't do its good work. And then this most important thing, I think, which is diplomacy's ability to help nations look beyond short-term losses to embrace long-term good. So what are 10 challenges of the future? I could list 100. I wonder what would be on your list, but here we go. I'm considering these top 10 future challenges for science-related diplomacy. Well, there's global security, cybersecurity. How vulnerable do you feel when the network goes down, when things are stopped? What sort of diplomacy will be required for humanity to come together and say, we're not going to let ourselves be that vulnerable? What about the next pandemic, our preparedness and our response, especially in light of some of the anti-vaccine things that we have going on now, the withdrawal by our nation from the WHO? How prepared will we be for the next pandemic? What about AMR, antimicrobial resistance? I want to come back to this one, so I won't spend a lot of time on it now. It is a huge problem, and if the only thing good that comes out of this is you know what AMR is, it will be a successful evening. Who owns the ocean? Ocean governance and conservation. Very difficult conversation, and there are lots and lots of businesses and nations right now that want to mine the floor of the ocean. We don't know much about it. It's a huge area for diplomacy. Then, of course, climate action, the big existential crisis of our age, and I do think that is not overblown to say that. Who's going to regulate AI? I mean, is it just going to be the industries that kind of do what science wants to do? Or is it going to be a place where the public and nations can step into it and say, this is the kind of world we want? Very difficult thing for science and diplomacy. What about space? Over and over and over again, there's space traffic management questions. I believe the space treaty that I know about, I didn't do a lot of research on this, states from 1967. 1967. Could be wrong about that. Somebody can call me on that. But there's not a lot of agreement on who's regulating space at this point. What about what I would really call generational poverty, which is how do we have full inclusion into a world driven by science and technology? How do we have full inclusion so that I called it digital education inclusion here, but really it's people being able to rise up experience their ability to contribute to a world driven by science and technology. Water security and management, huge issue the world over, and can we have global diplomacy across borders on water security and management? Genetic research and bioethics, huge issue. A lot of that's happening right here as we think about genetics, as we think about genomics. How will that affect the world? So I want to come back to AMR, antimicrobial resistance. So this is a looming crisis. This is the resistance we have to antibiotics, people's resistance to antibiotics. And if nothing changes, there will be more people in 2050 that will die from AMR than do from cancer. Over 10 million people a year will die. We won't be able to do surgeries in places because you won't be able to take an antibiotic. And the fact is that there's not widespread agreement on how to handle antibiotics right now. In some countries, you can buy antibiotics across the counter. You can just buy them because you want them, because you need them, so you take them, and we have antimicrobial resistance. So it's a fertile place for global cooperation. Here's a problem with antibiotics. They won't make anybody any money. It's hard to develop a new antibiotic. There's not a big enough market for it. So the market forces that are really pushing along new medicines for cancer or heart disease and that sort of thing, there's not a market mechanism really in place to incentivize the production of new antibiotics. It's going to take nations coming together and saying, oh, we have a problem that the market won't solve, and it's going to kill more people by 2050 than cancer does. Let us get together on it. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how we move forward. I just know that it's a giant problem that diplomacy and nations and people are going to have to try to solve. So that brings us to the current state of diplomacy in a changing world, and I am definitely not an expert on this. It's something that I read, I look at, I see what happens when we have countries that are more focused on themselves than the world and being global citizens. Certainly in the United States right now, this is a big challenge because people don't want to think of themselves as global citizens. They want to think of themselves as Americans first. But so there is a rise of authoritarianism and nationalism, not only in this country, but all around the world. There is an increasing distrust between nations and a withdrawal from multilateral institutions. That's just a fact. But diplomacy is more important than ever. There are 8 billion people on the planet. 8 billion people on the planet, all needing resources, all needing education, all needing to rise to the level of their ability. And the only way we're going to survive as a species is if we work together to do so. And so global challenges like AMR, climate change, pandemics, they demand international cooperation and diplomats and nations who will counter short-term, inward-looking policies with long-term, globally minded strategies. This may all seem like Captain Obvious, and I'm sorry if it does. I wish I could bring more to bear on this. I do think convenings like this are important, certainly at the Museum of Science, where we're trusted by academia, we're trusted by industry, we're trusted by the general public, we're trusted by government, is a place where people can come together and think out loud, and perhaps WorldBoston is as well. But we have to be clear what we're navigating. We're navigating, once again, limitations, the human limitations of human nature, navigating frailty and fear, both in others and within ourselves. We have to, once again, bridge these short-term political pressures and look at the long-term needs of humanity. Going back to someone like Doc Hammarskjöld, this humility, this patience working with adversaries, this vision to see the long-term horizon, that's what diplomats do. That's what great scientists do. That's what people who are citizens first do. Hopefully that's what we do. The work of diplomats is vital in weaving together the strengths of nations and mitigating their flaws. Without diplomacy, the power of science can actually fracture the world rather than bringing it together. So what can I say? I think one little thing to say is to go get a copy of Markings, read it, get to know Doc Hammarskjöld, get to know that part of yourself that wants to be as disciplined and devoted and committed to the world as he. And then just remember what Winston Churchill said about diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions. All right, thank you, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you so much. I'm Jano Mendler as far as with the BU Party Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come back to your first statement about a world in which science belongs to each of us and is for the good of all of us. But how do we communicate science in a way that everyone can own it? I'm wondering about your experience with institutions of, in a way, informal science education, such as the Boston Museum of Science. Do you have any lessons for us in how we can communicate in a language that will be both diplomatic in eliciting that quest for directions, but also that will nurture and inculcate that feeling of ownership of
Great.
science by everyone?
Thanks.
Really important and very difficult question. Of course, this is what we think about all day, every day at the Museum of Science. And I do really think it begins with wonder. It begins with awe. Children, older adults, everybody does have a sense that the world is wonderful. That is a place where we're united. So this past year, in 2024, there was one day when the entire world came together around science, and we were all on the same page, and it was all because of wonder, and that was the day of the eclipse. That was the day of the eclipse. Now, at the Museum of Science, we went to Chelsea, and we were on the ground in Chelsea handing out glasses, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and everyone came out. So the short answer to your question is I think it begins with a sense of awe and wonder, and a lot of times that's nature, but it's not always nature. I would say this as well, that people are very interested in active hope for themselves. So advances in medicine, advances in workforce development, advances in quality of life. We, as much as possible, we try to stay on the active hope side of things. So there's awe and wonder, there's active hope, and hopefully that gives us a chance to actually disagree when we need to disagree. I think on the edge of your question is, if there's a circle and you imagine someone outside that circle, or maybe you're outside their circle, how do you draw that Venn diagram so the circle includes you or it includes them? Difficult to do, but the simplest path, it seems to me, is awe and wonder.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah, Ed?
Again, thank you for your speech today. I come from the private sector industry, and I'm curious how much the Museum of Science works with industry. You certainly got quite a lot of it around you there in Kendall Square. Because science, you can discover the cure to all the problems of the world, but if you can't produce it or can't market, nobody knows it's there, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
That's where you can work together.
Completely agree. So when I came to the museum about 5 years ago, one of the things I said, our greatest asset is the intellectual capital of the community around us, and that includes industry. So as much as possible, we have the intellectual capital of Boston, academia, industry, government, and the general public pouring through the museum. So if you were at the museum today, you'd see lots of partnerships with Boston Dynamics, lots of AI stuff that's going on. We were meeting someone today, I forget what the subject was, but it was another example of someone from industry who was coming in to help make sense of some life sciences issue. And I do think, once again, on the edge of your comment, it's absolutely true. You have to translate science for the world, and that is usually industry. So we are pro industry insofar as industry creates jobs. It helps us translate science for people. But even then, what I would say is people in industry, probably like you, because you're at this thing tonight, even in industry, we still want people to think of themselves as citizens first. This is what we are trying to do to make the world a better place. And I don't think that's too romantic to think for industry, because I've met too many people like you who know that their work in industry is making the world a better place.
Do we have someone over here? I thought I saw. Okay, we'll do our rule and then Mary. I thought I had someone here. Okay.
Why do you say
I didn't see- okay.
science is shared or is for everyone? It seems to me that a lot of science research is proprietary. You have companies that are developing their own science for proprietary reasons. You've got Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. You've got the Chinese and Russian scientists. When they do science, and even basic science, it's not clear that they want to share it with everyone.
Not clear at all. It is a giant problem because the more professional science has become, the less people can participate in it. There's actually an article, which I haven't read, but I've read about in the most recent edition of Nature, that talks about trust in science goes up when people feel like they can somehow participate in where it's heading. And it goes way down if people feel like, because, like for instance, AI. How many of us feel like we can actually have a meaningful impact on the trajectory of AI? Good, I'm glad you do. I'd like to hear more. It feels like it's being handled by private industry out there and that we have no way to be a part of it. Now, there could be a regulatory environment that would make sense for people to participate through the democratic process. But I do believe that the relationship between science and democracy is very important, so that you can have people participating in the direction of science through some sort of a participatory process. And right now that seems very out of our realm. Another good example would be things like some of the cybersecurity issues where we're about privacy. These are things that feel like we can't participate. We need to do something about that. We do need to do something about that. I actually think that the public will want to have a say, if they could, through the democratic process.
Oh, thank you very much. I'd like your idea on perhaps a negative concept, and that's the concept of scarcity. And what I mean by that is many of us like to have our possessions, and we're fearful of losing them. With pets, we call it resource guarding, don't we? And we try and persuade them, no, you can't do that. If you do that, you won't share it. You won't have as much as if you do share it. So it's perfectly natural to want to regress to things like intellectual property, like ownership, and that's a very human, if you will, emotion and instinctual reaction to things around us. So isn't science then, in this sense, a perennial struggle? Something that is never achieved, but the struggle is important because maybe it'll get us closer to more genuine sharing and ability to control these natural instincts.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things in that question. And back to scarcity, I do think it's a blend. So in a constitutional democracy, we realize that there have to be sort of limits on human avarice, but there also have to be incentives for human innovation. So we have like a patent system. A patent system is designed to enable people to believe that, well, they will, if they get a patent, they'll have this scarce resource for a period of time. And then it goes out to the general public. So I think there's probably a blend between encouraging people to take risks so that they can have some sort of sense of ownership, but that sense of ownership doesn't last forever, because then things have to return to the common good. So it's probably a blend that I think our country was pretty good at establishing at one time, but it was established, things like the patent system, because of this human nature where we do just want more, and we do want to have control, and we do want to protect ourselves from our possessions. So balancing that with the also the need for others to have is, well, the work of diplomacy.
And then we had Mary right there.
Hi. Europe has generally been a little bit more aggressive in regulating things like privacy. As far as AI, Paul McCartney did mention that content creators and all the people who were creatives should be either paid for their use of their work or allowed to retain control of their work when AI is used to train their large language models. Do you know how far along they are in regulating this sort of use?
I actually don't, and maybe someone in this room would know more. Things like that are out there, things like clarity on things that are generated by things like ChatGPT with watermarks and that sort of thing, so you know the truth behind things. I think it's moving so fast. I am not an expert at all, but I think those are the kinds of things we do need to explore. And certainly Europe has been better about data, who owns what data, GDPR and that sort of thing. So I do think we have a lot of lessons to learn from Europe.
Great. And then we had a person right here. I guess Madeline can get you.
Hello, my name is Fernanda Sosa. I'm work with the Chile Massachusetts Alliance. So it's very interesting all what you said about the diplomacy and science and diplomacy, because I also lead a group of science and technology diplomatic circle of Boston. Oh. And one thing that I'm really concerned is about in this knowledge-based economy, the huge gap that is already being created between the developing countries and the global powers, especially the US and China. And how can we do to make these developing countries really understand the importance to connect with these poles of innovation to make more knowledge transfer. What I do, obviously, I bring a lot of delegations here, and I visit the museum every time I can. But I think there is this gap in this new era is going to be much broader than during the Industrial Revolution. And how can we make to help those countries?
Well, of course, difficult question, and I don't know the answer. I will tell you a moment of hope for me is that I am the chairman of the board for the past couple of years of the Association for Science and Technology Centers. That's the North American group, and we have about 350 science centers in our group. But we're very connected with science centers that are equivalents in Asia, ASPAC, in South America, Red Pop, Northern Africa, Southern Africa, Europe. And what I'm finding is that people really are picking up. They're vaulting ahead on science and technology, and they're taking advantage of their cell phones, but they're taking advantage of AI. So the possibility of regions, not just nations, but regions to band together to increase businesses, to increase science literacy, I find a lot of hope in that. I was at a recent conference in Korea and was so pleased to see all the advances that we were hearing about in Cambodia and Thailand and places where you feel like need to rise up. So I don't know how we generally are going to help developing nations to break the cycles of generational poverty. But I do think regions themselves are helping each other, and I find that to be somewhat hopeful.
Okay, I see your hands. I just want to note, it's so great that Fernanda is here, and we also have Torben Nielsen from the Danish Consulate General. It's something kind of cool about Boston. I'm not sure if it really happens in other cities, but we have actually science attaches who are based here, and they have created, for this very purpose, a science and technology diplomatic circle. So, yay Boston, yay diplomacy, yay science. Okay, I do have one question on Zoom, and then we'll come back here. So this is grouping together a couple of similar questions. Whether a person asks that in their view, the current administration is attacking higher education, and will that discourage people from feeling that they have a say in scientific development? Well,
I'm not sure normal, regular people feel like they have a say in higher education. So I don't know. I think the attacking of higher education and the attacking of institutions and elite institutions in particular, that's bad by itself. I'm not sure if the administration wasn't attacking them, that people would feel like they had any more of a say. So I'm trying to put together the question a little bit, but it gets back to this basic question of people's ability to participate in their future and saying what kind of world we want. And so I think we all need a good dose of humility in terms of allowing people to come in and have a seat at the table.
Great. Okay, so back to hands in the room. Yeah, so Martin, right here.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Martin. What concerns do you have around science and disinformation and science and misinformation, and in particular the disinformation aspect where it's intentional deception?
I have huge concerns for that. It's one of the things I'm most concerned about. And the quantity of misinformation and disinformation is so huge. I don't think there's any way to combat it issue by issue by issue. I think what we need to build in people is the muscle to look past it, to make things prove themselves, to have the ability to detect misinformation and disinformation. So I've often wondered if we could have a whole bunch of people out there debunking things or pre-bunking things, whether we could win the war. And the answer is no. There's just too much stuff out there. So we, as in informal sciences and also in schools and in businesses and families, we have to develop the muscle to be able to detect phony information and put things to a test. So I'm deeply concerned about it. And I'm hopeful the Museum of Science can play a big role if we're going to reach, our goal is to be reaching 1 billion people a year by 2030. Well, part of that should be this issue, to equip people to see things for what they are and to put things to the test.
Great. Was there someone, Colleen, did you, or there was someone right here? Yeah, you right here.
Hi, thank you. Kimberly Samaha. I'm on the advisory board here at the College of Engineering at BU, and we run a family foundation that's focusing in on science and business and all of these things. I think one of the things that's come up as I was listening to this is the age-old saying that money talks but diplomacy walks, so to speak. And I think that that's something, as I was listening to you talk, realizing that, yeah, you know, this idea of borders and biomes, and I think we can come together on those two pieces. But as we're seeing right now, the bottom line is still the money, you know, and so the idea that even all those things that you mentioned that have been put together in the last 10 years, they come unraveled really quickly with one swoop of it's not making enough money. So how do we bring that piece back in? I've heard other people in the group talking about it, but what's your thoughts about bringing the money to the table?
I wish I didn't have to say what I actually believe, but I'm going to say what I actually believe is going to bring people to their senses, and that's when they feel the pain themselves. I wish it were otherwise, but for instance, there is an open question right now about in this government about whether Medicare should continue to pay for hospice and palliative care services. Should that be a part of Medicare? Well, just wait till you need hospice and palliative care. Or how much of a Dickensian universe do we really need to have in terms of poverty in our country? I don't know, but I think money, like kind of a Gilded Age kind of view toward money, a very libertarian, Darwinian view toward money, that is what we have right now. That is the spirit of the age. And it's only when people feel enough pain or see it in their family or see it in their neighbors and they say, enough. We can't do this. We saw that in the Industrial Revolution. We saw that after the Great Depression. I would love to think that it's not going to take that kind of community pain, but I fear that it will before we come to our senses and say that we have values other than the bottom line.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name's Andre Brown, and I'd like to thank you for coming and having this event. My question goes back to a question you asked. How many people here feel like they're into AI, and only one person raised their hand? Is there any way that the Museum of Science could maybe do something about that, so we set up a program or something where we can come and meet and talk to bring that into our communities?
Well, please do. Please come. This year at the Museum of Science, we are devoting the entire year to the year of being human. The year of being human. What does it mean to be a human? And a lot of that is going to be life sciences oriented, but a big streak of it's going to be about AI. And so we have a whole AI gallery there. We're doing lots of convenings. We're working with people who are very pro AI, frankly, of which I am among them. And then some who are very, very dubious, including Joy Buolamwini from MIT. So there's lots and lots and lots of programming at the museum. There's some exhibits, but broadening it past the Museum of Science, I mean, to a great extent, you should just start using it. I mean, if you're not on ChatGPT now, start using it. If you don't have a sense of how to make it a part of your personal life, just start using it. And that kind of familiarity, you'll see its capacity to help with creative things and solve lots of problems. And you'll see a little bit more what's at stake, and it'll make it easier for you to weigh in on the argument of, oh, where is that data going? What's the privacy issue here? So the more you use it, the more you'll be empowered to be reasonable in the conversation about it.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to ask a question, something that one of the things that we focus on at WorldBoston is citizen diplomacy. That's a term that's gained a lot of traction in the past 25 years or so, that you don't have to be a card-carrying diplomat, but you can be effective as a citizen diplomat. Clearly, the international engagement of the museum is very important to you, and you plan for greater international engagement. How does that work? Why is it important? And what's coming?
Yeah, so part of it just goes back to that mission and vision. Seriously, 8 billion people on the planet. Who doesn't deserve access to high quality science learning? Right? Pick one out. There's nobody. So everyone, each of us, all of us. And that's just embedded in our mission. It's embedded in our vision. The second thing is there's 8 billion people on the planet, so our planet really needs global answers because we have global problems. That's where science and technology come in. So I couldn't imagine separating them. And then the third reason is what you've talked about, Mary, which is the world comes to Boston. The world comes here. Let's have them come to the museum and think about what kind of world we want. So it is so deeply embedded into our mission and vision and strategy.
Okay, thank you. I did see another, yeah, right here, and then there was also one over there. We'll get both of those, so go over here first.
Hi, thank you for coming. So I'm a PhD candidate at BU doing energy and environmental economics research with a focus on carbon taxes. And you mentioned the Montreal Protocol, and what I can say is in the energy economics community, there seems to be two basic consensus about environmental policy over the last 30 to 40 years, which is one, that policy was the most effective environmental policy perhaps ever envisaged and practiced around the globe. And there is a consensus amongst economists that we need to use carbon taxes as the optimal way to tackle climate change. So I'm wondering from your perspective, what do you believe are the impediments to creating some kind of a global framework that does global carbon pricing as the economists have been asking for decades compared to the Montreal Protocol being passed?
Right, well, the amount of pain that it took to get the aerosol can out of your house pales in comparison to a global carbon tax. It's just that simple. I mean, the economists are all right. They all agree. A global carbon tax will work. It seems to be incontrovertible, but no one's going to want to have that degree of pain on the short run until they start to feel it. It's back to that question. So what's getting in the way? comfort is getting in the way. And it's going to be very difficult to do what the evidence clearly suggests should be done because of the amount of self-sacrifice that it will take. Once again, I wish it were more, I wish there were some silver bullet beyond that, but there's not. Economists agree, it seems clear, but the degree of, antipathy toward any sort of taxes is very high, and that's just the way it is. I wish I could say otherwise.
Okay. So we're going to wrap it up with this question over here.
Thank you for spending the evening with us and for the interesting discussion. My name is Alex Adam. I'm a scientist turned patent attorney, so I appreciate your nod to the patent system earlier. You mentioned, and I was a little surprised how many people you reach. I mean, to me, the museum was a place where you go, and I took my kids there. I went there myself and so on. But you seem to imply that you reach many more people in other ways. I'm wondering if you could expand a little on how you do that and maybe how you plan to reach more people.
Yeah, so once again, we'll reach about 400 million people this year, and that's mainly through social, mainly smaller, things we do on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and so forth and so on. So it's small bites. We do have some long form video. We have some games that we have on platforms like Roblox. But I think the real answer, once again, is that science really is among humanity's common ground, and people really do think it's awesome, and they really think the world is awesome. And so we try to make sure, we're not trying to drive people to our website. That would never work. We go to where they are, and they are on YouTube. They are in Instagram. They are in TikTok. Now, the next bit, how do we get to 1 billion people a year? That's going to require a little bit more. And so more of a country-by-country strategy, more of a global strategy, more partnerships around the world. And when I first got to the Museum of Science, once again, 5 years ago, I said, we're going to reach 100 million people a year by 2030. And people laughed. They said, no way. And they were offended by it. Well, last year we reached 260 million. This year, 400 million. So now, when I'm saying we're going to reach 1 billion a year by 2030, they're like, why so little? So anyway, I think it's the world's global language, and especially when you're staying in the active hope area, people want to see it.
Okay.
By the way, our stuff on climate change doesn't get quite the pop that the stuff from space does. So.
The world is awesome. Right? Please join me in thanking Tim Ritchie.
Thank you.